When we think of power in history, our minds often race to the battlefield. Conquerors in shining armor, war cries echoing across empires, kings forging alliances with a signature or a sword. But history tells a richer, more complex story. One where queens commanded from behind the curtain, changed the course of nations with a single decision, and mastered the game of influence with brilliance that rivaled any battlefield general. This is not a tale of passive royalty draped in silk and silence. It is a saga of queens who reigned, ruled, and reshaped the world in their image. In the grand theater of European history, two dynasties stood at the heart of sweeping transformation: the Tudors of England and the Bourbons of France. These were more than families of royal blood. They were dynasties that produced some of the most formidable women history has ever known. And while their kings may have made the headlines, it was often their queens who made the difference. These women didn't just inherit thrones. They claimed power, navigated treacherous politics, manipulated religious tides, and left legacies that continue to shape the world we live in. Picture Elizabeth I of England, the so-called Virgin Queen, who ruled alone in a world dominated by men and steered a divided realm through religious turmoil, war, and intrigue. Her intellect, independence, and sheer political instinct transformed her into a legend. She wasn't merely a monarch. She was a symbol of national unity and a living embodiment of English resilience. She understood the value of image, of language, of courtly spectacle, and used them all to her advantage. Now look to France, where queens like Marie Antoinette emerged centuries later, embodying a very different, but equally dramatic, version of royal womanhood. She was a Bourbon queen born into privilege, married into power, and ultimately destroyed by the public's wrath. Her story is often simplified into extravagance and tragedy, but beneath the surface lies a deeper tale of a woman navigating the impossibility of royal life in a world spinning toward revolution. And between them lie other queens, Catherine de Medici and Boleyn, Mary Queen of Scots, each playing their part in this dynastic chessboard of power, alliance, betrayal, and survival. These women were not spectators to history. They were its architects. So how did these dynasties use their queens? Not just as consorts or symbols, but as political players? What was the role of femininity, fertility, and faith in royal legitimacy? And how did the Tudor and Bourbon queens shape the destinies of nations? This is not just a story of crowns and courts. This is the queen's power game. Welcome to Words of Time, where we unravel the past to reveal the power behind history's most unforgettable figures. If you're new here, make sure to hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into royal politics, dynastic drama, and untold stories. In this video, we'll explore the Queen's power game, Tudor versus Bourbon dynasties, diving into how royal women from two of Europe's most powerful dynasties influenced politics, religion, war, and the very meaning of monarchy. Let's uncover the women who ruled history from the shadows, and sometimes from the throne. During the tumultuous periods of European history, two dynasties emerged as powerful forces that would leave lasting legacies: the Tudor dynasty in England and the Bourbon dynasty in France. These royal houses not only shaped the political landscapes of their respective countries, but also witnessed the rise of some of the most formidable female rulers in history. Despite being born into deeply patriarchal societies where women were largely expected to be obedient, domestic, and politically passive, certain women from these dynasties defied expectations. They not only ascended to the throne but ruled with authority, intelligence, and determination, often steering their nations through crises and conflicts with remarkable poise. The Tudor dynasty began in the late 15th century, following the Wars of the Roses, a series of dynastic conflicts that plagued England for decades. When Henry VII emerged victorious, he established a new royal line that would rule for just over 118 years. The Tudor era, stretching from the late 1400s to the early 1600s, was marked by immense political upheaval, religious transformation, and cultural flourishing. The dynasty is perhaps best remembered not just for its monarchs, but particularly for the towering figure of Elizabeth I, one of the most celebrated female rulers in history. She reigned for 44 years and became a symbol of national strength and identity. The Bourbon dynasty, on the other hand, came into prominence in France during the late 16th century and went on to rule for much longer, despite interruptions. The Bourbons navigated one of the most volatile periods in French history, encompassing religious wars, revolutions, and eventual restoration. They too saw the rise of significant female figures, although the mechanisms of power and the paths to influence were often quite different compared to their English counterparts. One of the most notable women in Bourbon history is Marie Antoinette, who, despite not being born into the Bourbon family by blood, became emblematic of the monarchy's excesses and suffered a tragic end during the French Revolution. Both dynasties emerged in societies where the expectations for women were narrowly defined. Women were largely seen as subordinate to men, with their roles confined to marriage, childbirth, and the management of the household. Education for women was limited, and political involvement was typically discouraged or outright forbidden. However, in the context of royalty, the rules were occasionally bent or circumvented. When a male heir was lacking or when circumstances were dire, women could and did rise to power. Their ascension often sparked controversy and resistance, but it also allowed these women to reshape the narrative of what it meant to be a female leader in a male-dominated world. Despite the societal restrictions, the Tudor and Bourbon dynasties each produced female figures who challenged traditional gender roles. In England, Elizabeth I navigated a court full of male advisors and foreign powers with ambitions of control. She never married, famously declaring herself married to her country, and used her unmarried status as a diplomatic tool. Her reign is often referred to as a golden age, not only for the relative stability she maintained, but also for the cultural achievements of the time, including the works of William Shakespeare. In France, women wielded power in different ways. Queens consort, such as Catherine de Medici, held significant sway behind the scenes. Catherine, born into the powerful Medici family of Italy, became Queen of France through marriage and later served as regent for her sons. During her time in power, she navigated a complex web of religious and political conflicts, including the French Wars of Religion. Though often maligned in historical accounts, Catherine's political acumen and strategic thinking helped preserve the Bourbon dynasty during precarious times. While Elizabeth I ruled in her own name and held full sovereign authority, the influence of Bourbon women often came through familial and marital connections. This contrast highlights one of the key differences between the two dynasties. In England, the concept of a queen regnant, a woman ruling in her own right, was reluctantly accepted due to specific succession crises. In France, the Salic law explicitly barred women from inheriting the throne, meaning that female political power had to be exerted indirectly. This legal barrier fundamentally shaped the way women could engage with governance and the limits of their public influence. Nonetheless, similarities between the two dynasties can be found in the ways these women used the tools available to them. In both England and France, queens employed marriage alliances, courtly intrigue, patronage of the arts, and religious affiliations to solidify their positions. They cultivated strong images of themselves, sometimes leaning into traditional feminine roles to disarm critics, and at other times adopting masculine rhetoric and symbolism to assert authority. Elizabeth I often dressed in elaborate clothing that emphasized her uniqueness and royal status while using language traditionally reserved for kings. Similarly, Catherine de Medici and Marie Antoinette used elaborate court rituals and visual displays of power to assert their influence. The religious transformations of the time also played a significant role in shaping the authority of these queens. In England, the break from the Roman Catholic Church under Henry VIII paved the way for a unique religious identity that Elizabeth I later solidified. Her religious policies sought a middle ground, aiming to unite a divided country. Her skill in navigating religious tensions contributed significantly to the longevity of her rule. In France, however, the Catholic faith remained deeply entrenched, and the religious wars between Catholics and Protestants tore the nation apart. Queens like Catherine de Medici had to balance these factions carefully, often acting as mediators and power brokers in an attempt to maintain royal control and prevent civil war. Another important aspect of the comparison lies in the personal legacies of these queens. Elizabeth I died childless, ending the Tudor dynasty and ushering in the Stuart era. Her carefully managed image and her legacy as the Virgin Queen helped to immortalize her in the English imagination. She became a symbol of English nationalism and a model of female leadership for centuries to come. In contrast, Bourbon queens often bore many children, fulfilling their dynastic roles as mothers and conduits of political alliance. Yet this biological contribution did not necessarily translate into enduring respect. Marie Antoinette, for example, was harshly judged for her perceived extravagance and inability to produce a male heir quickly. Her downfall was as much about her symbolic role as a queen in a time of upheaval as it was about her personal failings. The way history remembers these queens also reflects broader societal attitudes toward female power. Elizabeth I is often celebrated as a wise and formidable leader, while Marie Antoinette has been vilified as frivolous and out of touch, despite the complex circumstances she faced. These contrasting portrayals underscore the fine line royal women had to walk. Too much ambition, independence, or defiance could lead to backlash, while too much passivity could result in irrelevance or manipulation by others. Both dynasties saw their female members negotiating this perilous path, with varying degrees of success. It is also worth noting how each queen interacted with the institutions around them. Elizabeth I carefully managed her relationship with Parliament, balancing her authority with the need for political support. She frequently addressed Parliament herself, and was known for her persuasive speeches and rhetorical skill. French queens, operating in a system with less parliamentary tradition, often had to rely more on personal networks, court alliances, and the favor of the king. This difference in institutional context shaped the strategies available to them and their effectiveness in pursuing political goals. Cultural patronage was another realm where Tudor and Bourbon queens left their mark. Elizabeth I's court was a center of literary and artistic activity. Writers, poets, and playwrights flourished under her reign, and she skillfully used patronage to promote her image and the values she wanted to associate with her rule. In France, queens like Marie de Medici and Anne of Austria also supported the arts and helped to cultivate the grandeur of the French court. The opulence of Versailles, though associated more directly with Louis XIV, was also a product of decades of cultural investment by the royal family, including its female members. In examining these queens' political and cultural contributions, one must also consider the broader implications for women in their societies. While their power was exceptional and often not replicable by ordinary women, they nonetheless challenged the assumptions of their time. Their visibility and success, however limited or contested, opened up imaginative possibilities for what women could achieve. They provided models, both idealized and cautionary, for future generations, and their stories continue to inspire and provoke debate. In terms of foreign policy and diplomacy, Elizabeth I was particularly adept. She maintained a cautious approach, avoiding entanglements in costly wars while playing European powers against each other. Her defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 was a defining moment, celebrated as a testament to her leadership and England's growing maritime strength. French queens, while not typically in charge of foreign policy, still influenced international relations through marriage alliances and negotiations. Catherine de Medici, for example, orchestrated numerous marriages between her children and other European royal families, attempting to create a web of alliances that would stabilize her kingdom. Succession crises also highlighted the different roles queens could play. Elizabeth I's lack of an heir led to decades of speculation and political maneuvering, whereas Bourbon queens were expected to secure the line through childbirth. The pressures placed on them were immense, and their success or failure in this domain often defined their public reputations. This divergence in expectations underscores the different types of power exercised by queens in these two dynasties: political, symbolic, maternal, and sometimes all at once. The story of powerful queens in the Tudor and Bourbon dynasties is one of negotiation between tradition and change, gender and authority, public role and private identity. While their paths to power and methods of rule differed, the women of these dynasties demonstrated resilience, strategic thinking, and an enduring impact on their nation's histories. They redefined what it meant to be a queen in Europe, challenging the notion that power and leadership belonged solely to men. Their legacies, both celebrated and contested, continue to shape our understanding of monarchy, gender, and political agency. Let's explore the Tudor queens. The Tudor period in English history, spanning from the late 15th to the early 17th century, remains one of the most intriguing and transformative eras in European politics. Central to the unfolding of this historical drama were the queens of the Tudor dynasty, figures who, despite existing in a male-dominated world, found ways to assert power, influence policy, and shape the destiny of the nation. Among the most notable of these were Marie I of England, Elizabeth I, and Mary, Queen of Scots. Each faced an intricate web of political expectations, religious upheaval, and dynastic rivalry. Yet, in their unique ways, they navigated this labyrinth with a combination of personal determination, political acumen, and often strategic use of marriage, whether by embracing or rejecting it as a political tool. Mary I of England was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Her path to the throne was far from straightforward. After Henry's separation from the Catholic Church to Mary and Boleyn, Mary was declared illegitimate and removed from the line of succession. Her fortunes changed after the death of her half-brother, Edward VI. Through a mix of political maneuvering and popular support, Mary seized the crown in the face of an attempted coup by Lady Jane Grey. Her reign, though lasting only 5 years, left a lasting impact on the Tudor legacy. One of Mary's most significant decisions was her marriage to Philip II of Spain. From a dynastic perspective, the match seemed advantageous. It united England with the most powerful Catholic monarchy in Europe and promised to restore Catholicism in England. However, the alliance was met with suspicion and hostility by many of Mary's subjects, who feared Spanish dominance. The marriage produced no heirs, and Mary's efforts to re-Catholicize England through harsh persecution of Protestants earned her a controversial legacy. Over 200 Protestants were burned at the stake during her reign, a policy that, while intended to reinforce her religious convictions, ultimately marred her reputation and sowed seeds of rebellion. Mary's use of marriage as a political instrument demonstrated both the potential and the peril of such alliances. On one hand, the union with Spain aligned England with a formidable Catholic ally. On the other, it alienated her Protestant subjects and failed to produce the dynastic security she so desperately needed. Her inability to bear children left the throne to her half-sister Elizabeth, whose approach to power would contrast starkly with Mary's. Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry VIII and Boleyn, inherited a kingdom rife with religious division and political instability. Her legitimacy had long been questioned, and her gender was seen as a significant disadvantage in the male-dominated politics of the time. Yet, Elizabeth transformed these perceived weaknesses into strengths. By presenting herself as a stabilizing force and cultivating a carefully crafted image of virginity and piety, she managed to rally support across religious and political divides. Perhaps the most defining characteristic of Elizabeth's reign was her refusal to marry. In a period where queens were expected to secure alliances and succession through matrimony, Elizabeth's choice to remain single was both radical and strategic. She was courted by numerous suitors, including foreign princes and domestic nobles, but she used these courtships as diplomatic leverage rather than actual commitments. Her unmarried status allowed her to retain full sovereign authority, free from the influence of a husband who might seek to dominate the English throne. Elizabeth's rejection of marriage was not merely personal, it was political. By maintaining her independence, she avoided the pitfalls that had plagued her sister Mary. She did not tie her fate to a foreign power, nor did she risk alienating her subjects through unpopular alliances. Instead, Elizabeth fostered an image of herself as the Virgin Queen, wedded to her country and her people. This cultivated persona was deeply effective, bolstering her authority and enhancing her mystique. Her rule, which lasted 44 years, brought relative stability to England and is often seen as a golden age of English culture and power. While Elizabeth's reign is often celebrated for its success, it was also marked by continual threats to her authority, many of which centered on the question of succession. As she grew older and remained childless, concerns about who would follow her intensified. One of the most persistent threats to her reign was her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, Queen of Scots, was the great-granddaughter of Henry VII and therefore had a legitimate claim to the English throne. A Catholic in a Protestant-leaning kingdom, Mary represented both a dynastic and religious alternative to Elizabeth. Her life was marked by dramatic reversals of fortune, personal scandal, and political intrigue. Married first to the Dauphin of France, she became Queen of France for a brief period before returning to rule Scotland after her husband's death. Her subsequent marriages, first to Lord Darnley and then to the Earl of Bothwell, fueled controversy and led to her eventual imprisonment. Mary's political downfall was tied not only to her marital choices, but also to her ambition and the threat she posed to Elizabeth. Her marriage to Darnley produced a son, James, who would later become James I of England. However, Darnley's murder and Mary's hasty marriage to the man widely suspected of killing him led to public outrage and political revolt. Forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, Mary fled to England seeking protection from Elizabeth. Instead, she was imprisoned for 19 years. During her captivity, Mary remained a focal point for Catholic plots to overthrow Elizabeth. Her presence in England was a constant reminder of the fragility of Elizabeth's rule, and her continued existence posed a threat that Elizabeth could not ignore indefinitely. After evidence emerged that Mary had been involved in a plot to assassinate Elizabeth, she was tried and executed in 1587. This decision was not taken lightly. Executing a fellow monarch was unprecedented and controversial. However, it also eliminated one of the most dangerous rivals to the Tudor crown. Mary, Queen of Scots, embodied the perils and limitations of female rule in the 16th century. Her reliance on marriage as a political strategy, first in France, then in Scotland, did not yield the security she sought. Her personal choices became political liabilities, and her reign was undermined by internal conflict and foreign interference. Yet her legacy endured, not least because her son would eventually unite the crowns of England and Scotland. Each of these queens, Mary I, Elizabeth I, and Mary, Queen of Scots, demonstrated a distinct approach to wielding power in a world that offered limited avenues for female authority. Mary I used marriage to try and strengthen her religious and political agenda, but the alliance with Spain backfired. Elizabeth I rejected marriage altogether, instead leveraging the symbolism of virginity to consolidate her rule. Mary, Queen of Scots, embraced traditional dynastic strategies, but her choices undermined her reign and ultimately cost her life. Despite these differences, there were common threads in their strategies. All three queens understood the importance of public image. They engaged in elaborate rituals, corresponded diplomatically, and presented themselves as embodiments of national identity. They navigated court factions, religious divisions, and foreign diplomacy with a keen awareness of how their gender both constrained and empowered them. Their decisions had lasting consequences for the Tudor dynasty. Mary I's failure to produce an heir and her aggressive religious policies contributed to the eventual re-entrenchment of Protestantism under Elizabeth. Elizabeth's long and stable reign allowed England to recover from earlier turmoil and set the stage for expansion and cultural flourishing. Her refusal to marry ended the direct Tudor line, but her reign gave way to the Stuart dynasty under James VI of Scotland, uniting the two kingdoms. Mary, Queen of Scots, though never Queen of England, played a pivotal role in this transition through her son. The stories of these women are not merely tales of personal ambition or royal rivalry. They are reflections of the broader dynamics of power, gender, and statecraft in early modern Europe. The Tudor queens had to constantly balance personal desires with political necessities. They were scrutinized not just as rulers, but as women, expected to be chaste, obedient, and nurturing, even as they were called upon to lead armies, make policy, and suppress rebellion. They also operated in an environment where political instability was the norm. The religious transformations unleashed by Henry VIII's break with Rome had not settled by the time Mary and Elizabeth came to power. Each had to chart a course through the competing demands of Catholic and Protestant factions, both at home and abroad. Their personal religious beliefs were not just private convictions, but public policies that shaped the lives of their subjects. The legacy of these Tudor queens continues to resonate today. They broke ground as female rulers in an era when such a role was rare and contested. Their lives demonstrate that power, when wielded by women, could be just as effective, just as strategic, and just as impactful as when held by men, though often at greater personal cost. Their stories challenge assumptions about gender and authority and invite reflection on the enduring complexities of leadership. The Tudor queens did more than simply rule. They reshaped the very nature of monarchy in England. Their reigns proved that queens could be as formidable as kings, that strategic use of marriage, or its rejection, could alter the course of history, and that personal choices made in the crucible of power could echo across centuries. Through diplomacy, resilience, and determination, Mary I, Elizabeth I, and Mary, Queen of Scots, each left an indelible mark on the history of the Tudor dynasty and the evolution of female sovereignty in Europe. Now we will explore the Bourbon queens. In the history of the Bourbon dynasty, the legacy of power is often associated with kings like Henry IV, Louis XIV, and Louis XVI. Yet, alongside these monarchs stood formidable queens whose political influence, personal resilience, and strategic acumen shaped the very foundations of France's monarchy. These women, including Anne of Austria, Marie de Medici and Marie Antoinette, served not only as royal consorts, but also as mothers of future kings and, at times, as regents during periods of transition or instability. Their power, while often informal or hidden behind ceremonial roles, was very real and had lasting effects on the Bourbon dynasty and on the course of European history. These Bourbon queens existed in a world where the official doctrine of Salic law excluded women from inheriting the throne, a legal structure that emphasized male succession and limited direct female rule. Yet queens wielded power through other means, through influence over their husbands, through the education and guidance of their sons, and in some cases, through regency, where they ruled as caretakers of the realm during a monarch's minority or absence. The scope of their authority was often defined not by laws, but by circumstance, opportunity, and personality. Each of these queens found her own path through the intricate labyrinth of French court politics, religious divisions, and diplomatic pressures. Marie de Medici, born into the powerful Medici family of Florence in the latter half of the 16th century, became Queen of France through her marriage to King Henry IV. The union was a political alliance intended to strengthen ties between France and the Italian principalities. When Henry was assassinated in the early 17th century, their son, the future Louis XIII, was only 8 years old. This thrusts Marie into the role of regent at a critical time in French history. As regent, Marie de Medici confronted immense challenges. The court was rife with factionalism, and France remained deeply divided between Catholic and Protestant factions. Though Henry IV had converted to Catholicism to secure the throne, tensions remained high. Marie, a devout Catholic, was viewed with suspicion by many of the nobles, particularly those who supported a more moderate or Protestant-leaning stance. Nevertheless, she moved quickly to consolidate her power, removing opponents and installing trusted allies. One of the most significant of these was the Italian-born Concino Concini, whose influence over Marie would later contribute to her downfall. Despite her determination and intelligence, Marie's reliance on foreign advisors and her often authoritarian approach alienated key members of the French aristocracy. Her regency faced numerous uprisings and conspiracies, culminating in her eventual exile after her son came of age and took control of the government. However, even after her formal regency ended, Marie remained a powerful political figure. She would later orchestrate attempts to regain influence, including engaging in court intrigue and forging foreign alliances. Though her relationship with Louis XIII became strained and eventually broke down entirely, her actions during the Regency period helped to shape the future of the Bourbon monarchy by reinforcing the centralization of royal authority and the prominence of court politics. Anne of Austria, another pivotal figure in the Bourbon lineage, was born a Spanish princess and became Queen of France through her marriage to Louis XIII. Like Marie de Medici before her, Anne's influence grew significantly after the death of her husband. When Louis XIII died, their son Louis XIV was only 4 years old. Once again, a queen mother stepped into the regency during a monarch's minority, navigating the same treacherous political terrain Marie had encountered. Anne's regency was marked by the presence and partnership of Cardinal Mazarin, a skilled and pragmatic statesman who helped her manage both domestic and foreign affairs. The regency faced numerous threats, most notably the series of civil wars known as the Fronde. These uprisings, driven by noble opposition to royal authority and by general unrest, tested Anne's resolve and political savvy. Throughout the Fronde, Anne remained steadfast in her commitment to securing her son's throne. She navigated alliances, quelled rebellions, and maintained a vision of centralized monarchical power that would later become the hallmark of Louis XIV's reign. Unlike Marie de Medici, Anne succeeded in preserving her influence even after her son came of age. She continued to advise him and remained an important figure at court for many years. Her political instincts, combined with her experience during the Regency, helped shape the character and policies of Louis XIV, who would go on to become the most powerful and autocratic monarch in French history. Her reign as regent and her role as mother and mentor were instrumental in laying the foundation for what would become known as the Age of Absolutism. While Marie de Medici and Anne of Austria operated in times of instability and war, Marie Antoinette entered the French court during a period of apparent prosperity, only to see it unravel into chaos. Born an Austrian archduchess, she became Queen of France through her marriage to Louis XVI. Their union was designed to cement the alliance between France and Austria, two major European powers. However, Marie Antoinette's position in the French court was precarious from the outset. As a foreigner and a Habsburg, she was viewed with suspicion and often accused of prioritizing Austrian interests over those of France. Marie Antoinette's early years as queen were marked by her youth, inexperience, and increasing isolation within the court. The rigid structure of Versailles, with its elaborate rituals and constant surveillance, provided little privacy and few real avenues for political influence. Initially more concerned with fashion and entertainment than governance, she became a symbol of royal excess at a time when the people of France were suffering from economic hardship and social inequality. Over time, however, Marie Antoinette began to take a more active interest in politics, particularly as the revolution loomed. She advised her husband, intervened in ministerial appointments, and attempted to steer France through its growing crisis. Her actions were often clumsy or misinterpreted, and her efforts to support counter-revolutionary causes earned her the nickname Madame Deficit. Despite her attempts to save the monarchy, public sentiment turned decisively against her. As the revolution escalated, Marie Antoinette's role shifted from that of a distant and unpopular queen to a beleaguered symbol of monarchy itself. She was imprisoned with her family, subjected to intense scrutiny, and eventually tried and executed by guillotine in the year 1793. Her death, along with that of Louis XVI, marked the end of the Bourbon monarchy in its original form and the beginning of a new, republican era in French history. While Marie Antoinette is often remembered for her extravagance and her tragic end, her story also highlights the limits and dangers of female power in a time of revolutionary upheaval. She was a queen consort, not a regent, yet her perceived influence over the king and her involvement in political affairs made her a central figure in the revolutionary imagination. Her downfall was not merely personal. It symbolized the collapse of an entire political order. Despite their different circumstances and outcomes, and of Austria, Marie de Medici, and Marie Antoinette all shared common strategies in navigating the treacherous waters of court life. Each relied on personal relationships, whether with cardinals, ministers, or family members, to secure their positions. Each used cultural and ceremonial practices to project authority, even when their legal power was limited. And each, in their own way, attempted to influence the course of France's destiny through negotiation, persuasion, and resilience. Their actions had lasting impacts not only on the Bourbon dynasty, but also on the broader contours of European history. Marie de Medici's regency helped reinforce the emerging notion of a centralized French state, and of Austria's leadership during the Fronde ensured the survival of the monarchy at a moment of intense internal division and directly influenced the policies of Louis XIV, who embodied the height of absolutist rule. Marie Antoinette's reign, meanwhile, served as a cautionary tale about the perils of disconnection from public sentiment and the vulnerability of monarchs in an age of political change. Moreover, these queens contributed to the evolution of queenship itself. While they were barred from ruling as sovereigns in their own right, they expanded the informal and behind-the-scenes avenues available to royal women. Their examples would be studied and referenced by later generations of European queens and consorts, who saw in them both the possibilities and the limitations of female power. The role of the Queen Mother, in particular, gained new significance during the Bourbon period. Both Marie de Medici and Anne of Austria demonstrated that the position could be one of real influence, especially during times of minority rule. As regents, they not only administered the affairs of the kingdom, but also shaped the political education and worldview of their sons. In doing so, they played a crucial part in the continuity and transformation of the monarchy from one generation to the next. Their involvement in foreign diplomacy also extended the reach of their influence beyond France. Through marriage negotiations, correspondence with other courts, and participation in treaty discussions, these queens helped define France's position in the broader European order. Their familial ties to foreign dynasties made them valuable diplomatic assets, and their actions often had repercussions that extended well beyond French borders. In cultural terms, Bourbon queens were also significant patrons of the arts. Marie de Medici famously commissioned the great artist Peter Paul Rubens to paint a series of monumental works celebrating her life and regency. These paintings were not just expressions of vanity, but carefully constructed political statements, designed to legitimize her authority and commemorate her achievements. Anne of Austria similarly supported artistic and religious projects that reinforced the image of a pious and benevolent monarchy. Even Marie Antoinette, often criticized for her extravagant tastes, contributed to the development of new artistic styles and the refinement of court culture. In conclusion, the queens of the Bourbon dynasty were far more than decorative figures or passive companions to kings. Through regency, negotiation, cultural patronage, and strategic relationships, they carved out spaces of power in a male-dominated system. They faced enormous challenges: religious conflict, political factionalism, civil war, and revolution, but met them with a range of strategies that reflected their intelligence, adaptability, and determination. Their stories remind us that history is not only made by those who sit on the throne, but also by those who stand beside it, advise it, and protect it in times of uncertainty. The legacies of Marie de Medici and of Austria and Marie Antoinette demonstrate the complexities of female power in the early modern era and the enduring impact of women who dared to lead in the shadows of kings. Their influence, though sometimes obscured by the grandeur or the tragedy of their times, helped shape the destiny of one of Europe's most important dynasties and contributed to the unfolding narrative of monarchy, gender, and political agency in the modern world. Now we will compare and contrast the power dynamics of Tudor and Bourbon queens, emphasizing the differences in their roles, strategies, and the political landscapes they inhabited. In exploring the political influence and lived experiences of queens within the Tudor and Bourbon dynasties, it becomes clear that the power dynamics they navigated were shaped by deeply rooted cultural, religious, and political frameworks. While both groups of queens existed within patriarchal societies that placed firm constraints on women's authority, they operated in different contexts that influenced how they accessed and exerted power. The Tudor queens of England and the Bourbon queens of France developed distinct strategies to assert influence, not only due to their individual temperaments and circumstances, but also as a reflection of the unique challenges and expectations that defined their respective political landscapes. The Tudor period, stretching from the late 15th to the early 17th century, was marked by religious upheaval, monarchical centralization, and dynastic uncertainty. It included formidable figures such as Mary I and Elizabeth I, both of whom reigned in their own right as queens regnant, an exceptional situation in a world where male succession was the norm. In contrast, the Bourbon dynasty, which ruled France from the late 16th century until the late 18th century, maintained a rigid adherence to Salic law, which explicitly barred women from the throne. This meant that Bourbon queens, such as Marie de Medici and of Austria and Marie Antoinette, could not rule as sovereigns, but they nonetheless wielded power as queen consorts, queen mothers, and regents. This fundamental difference between queens regnant and queens consort shaped the way Tudor and Bourbon queens approached power. In England, the rare but impactful presence of female sovereigns allowed for direct monarchical control, even in a male-dominated political environment. Mary I, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, ascended the throne in the mid-16th century after the brief reign of her younger half-brother Edward VI. Her legitimacy was initially challenged, but her status as Henry's eldest legitimate child ultimately secured her position. Despite the immense challenges of governing as a woman, Mary did not rule through a regent or male proxy. Her reign was characterized by her commitment to restoring Roman Catholicism in England, which had been dismantled by her father and further distanced during her brother's rule. Her policies, while controversial, reflected a sovereign authority that was both deeply personal and fundamentally political. Mary's marriage to Philip of Spain was a significant political decision, one meant to forge a Catholic alliance and strengthen her position. However, the union was deeply unpopular in England, and despite the formal title of king being conferred on Philip, it was Mary who remained the central political figure. The lack of a surviving heir and the subsequent reversion of power to Protestant forces complicated her legacy, but her reign nonetheless demonstrated that a woman could serve as the ultimate authority in Tudor England. Following Mary's death, Elizabeth I, the daughter of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, ascended the throne. Elizabeth's reign would become one of the most iconic in English history, not only because of her longevity and political skill, but because of her adept handling of gender expectations. Unlike her half-sister, Elizabeth chose never to marry. This decision, though controversial, allowed her to maintain full sovereign authority without the risk of having a husband claim power. She famously referred to herself as having the heart and stomach of a king, and crafted an image of herself as both a virginal, divine ruler and a political pragmatist. Her refusal to marry became a political tool, used to keep foreign powers and domestic factions in check through the possibility of alliance, while at the same time avoiding the ceding of power to a husband. Elizabeth's use of courtly rituals, patronage, and public spectacle were all strategies that allowed her to wield soft power while maintaining the illusion of divine right. Her reign was marked by religious compromise, colonial expansion, and a careful balancing of court factions. The image of the Virgin Queen, adorned in pearls and divine regalia, was not merely aesthetic. It was a calculated assertion of control in a world that doubted a woman's capacity to govern. In contrast, Bourbon queens were not permitted to rule in their own name. Their power came from their relationships to the king and the heir. Marie de Medici, who married Henry IV of France, was thrust into the regency after her husband's assassination, as her son Louis XIII was still a child. Her position as regent was legally recognized, but politically unstable. Unlike Elizabeth, who wielded full sovereign power through her own authority, Marie had to rely on alliances, appointments, and personal networks to assert control. Her use of foreign advisors and her reliance on court favorites like Concino Concini created resentment among the French nobility, leading eventually to her exile once her son came of age. And of Austria, wife of Louis XIII and mother of Louis XIV, encountered similar circumstances, but navigated them with more enduring success. Like Marie, she became regent after her husband's death, with her son still a minor. Anne's regency was defined by her alliance with Cardinal Mazarin, who helped guide policy and defend the monarchy during the civil uprisings of the Fronde. Anne's regency was characterized by strategic negotiation, persistence, and a willingness to suppress rebellion through both force and diplomacy. Her power, while technically temporary, left a lasting imprint on the style of monarchy her son would later adopt. The contrast between Anne and Elizabeth reveals much about the power dynamics of the two dynasties. Where Elizabeth consolidated power around herself as a solitary ruler and shared power strategically, maintaining influence through advisors and the careful management of crisis. The Bourbon system, built on elaborate court rituals, noble privileges, and strict legal codes, offered less formal space for female authority, but women-like and proved adept at carving out influence nonetheless. Marie Antoinette, the last significant Bourbon queen before the Revolution, faced a vastly different situation. Unlike her regent predecessors, she was a queen consort with no direct political role. Her marriage to Louis XVI was intended to solidify a Franco-Austrian alliance. However, she was never accepted fully by the French people or court. The rigid expectations placed upon her, to produce an heir, to adhere to French customs, to remain apolitical, stood in direct conflict with the rumors and accusations that swirled around her. Whether it was the infamous, though likely apocryphal, "Let them eat cake," or the constant critique of her extravagant spending, Marie Antoinette became a scapegoat for public anger during a time of economic and political instability. Despite her limited formal authority, she attempted to influence policy and court appointments during the final years of the monarchy. As the revolution unfolded, she urged her husband to resist reform and maintain royal authority, actions which may have hastened the monarchy's demise. Her arrest, trial, and execution in the early 1790s marked the dramatic and symbolic end of an era. While Elizabeth had ruled through image and isolation, and Anne had ruled through negotiation and regency, Marie Antoinette found herself engulfed by a revolutionary wave that rendered all such strategies ineffective. One of the key differences in the power strategies of Tudor and Bourbon queens lies in their relationship to public perception. Tudor queens, particularly Elizabeth, were masters of image-making. They understood the importance of public ceremony, controlled narratives, and symbolic gestures. Elizabeth's long-standing refusal to marry was not just a personal choice, but a message to her subjects. Her loyalty was to England alone. In a similar but less successful way, Mary I used marriage and Catholic identity to try to restore a religious and dynastic order, though with far more limited public enthusiasm. Bourbon queens, on the other hand, were subjected to a different kind of scrutiny, especially as court life in France became more ceremonial and performative. Versailles, with its hall of mirrors and elaborate etiquette, demanded a constant performance of royal grace. But unlike Elizabeth, who controlled her own image, Marie Antoinette found herself defined by gossip, pamphlets, and caricatures. The expanding print culture of the 18th century meant that public opinion was harder to control, and Marie Antoinette became a victim of the very visibility that had once empowered queens like Elizabeth. Another significant contrast lies in the religious and political environments each dynasty faced. Tudor England was a battleground of Reformation and Counter-Reformation forces, which provided queens with both a risk and an opportunity. Mary I used her Catholicism as a badge of legitimacy, while Elizabeth fashioned a Protestant state that was nonetheless flexible enough to accommodate a range of practices. Religion was a source of both division and cohesion, and Tudor queens had to walk a tightrope between doctrinal enforcement and political stability. In Bourbon France, Catholicism was the bedrock of monarchy. After the Wars of Religion and the Edict of Nantes, the French crown became increasingly associated with Catholic identity. This gave Bourbon queens less flexibility in religious matters, but it also provided a clearer ideological framework. Anne of Austria and Marie de Medici both used their Catholic identities to justify their regencies and policies, and their piety was often portrayed as a virtue in times of crisis. Societal expectations also shaped the limitations and opportunities each queen faced. In England, the idea of a ruling queen was unusual, but not impossible. The succession crisis that followed Henry VIII's marriages and the relative weakness of other claimants allowed Mary and Elizabeth to claim the throne. Their reigns, however, were constantly scrutinized for signs of femininity or weakness. In France, the legal exclusion of women from the throne meant that female rule had to occur indirectly, through regency, influence, or manipulation. Yet paradoxically, these informal avenues sometimes provided Bourbon queens with more enduring political presence. While Elizabeth ruled alone and faced constant pressure to marry, Anne of Austria shared power through Cardinal Mazarin, shaping policy in a less direct but more sustainable manner. The differences between these two dynastic systems reflect deeper cultural values. The English model, shaped by Protestantism, parliamentary politics, and dynastic accident, allowed for female sovereignty but demanded extraordinary individual skill and sacrifice. The French model, rooted in Catholic hierarchy and absolute monarchy, denied female sovereignty but allowed for regency and influence through maternal roles. In both cases, queens had to navigate a world designed to exclude them from power, and yet they found ways to influence policy, shape court culture, and affect national destinies. The Tudor and Bourbon queens demonstrate that female power in early modern Europe was never straightforward. It was constrained by law, tradition, and gender norms, yet it was also shaped by opportunity, personality, and circumstance. Whether through direct rule, regency, or influence behind the scenes, these queens reshaped the nature of monarchy and challenged the boundaries of female authority in an era that often sought to deny it. Their stories are not merely footnotes to the reigns of kings. They are integral to understanding the complexities of power, gender, and governance in the making of modern Europe. The queens of the Tudor and Bourbon dynasties stand as compelling examples of how women, even in deeply patriarchal societies, found ways to wield power, shape political events, and leave enduring legacies that resonate far beyond their own lifetimes. Their stories span centuries and nations, crossing religious divides, dynastic conflicts, and shifting political landscapes. What binds them is not merely their royal status, but their determination to assert agency in contexts that repeatedly sought to limit their influence. Through courage, diplomacy, symbolism, sacrifice, and personal strength, these queens, rulers, consorts, regents, and mothers, contributed in profound ways to the historical narratives of their dynasties and helped redefine the nature of power itself. In the Tudor context, figures like Mary I and Elizabeth I defied contemporary expectations of womanhood by claiming and exercising sovereign authority. Mary, often remembered for her intense Catholicism and the violent re-establishment of the old faith, was a woman forced to fight for her birthright in a hostile and skeptical world. Her reign, though brief and controversial, was a groundbreaking assertion of female legitimacy in a line of succession that many hoped would exclude her. She proved that a woman could not only inherit a throne but govern in her own name, challenge political adversaries, and engage in international diplomacy on equal footing with male rulers. Elizabeth, her half-sister and successor, took the concept of queenship to an entirely different level. Her reign of over 4 decades is one of the most celebrated in English history, not just because of military victories and cultural flourishing, but because of her masterful manipulation of public image and political theater. She became both a monarch and a myth, combining the authority of a king with the charisma of a beloved figurehead. Her decision to remain unmarried allowed her to maintain control of her court, her policies, and her personal autonomy. In choosing to govern without a husband, Elizabeth set a precedent for female sovereignty that reverberated through history, challenging the assumption that a woman required male guidance to rule effectively. Mary, Queen of Scots, though not a Tudor by birth, played a crucial role in this dynastic web. Her tragic life, marked by imprisonment, forced abdication, and execution, underscored the dangers of queenship in an era of religious and political strife. Yet even in death, Mary's legacy endured. Her son would unite the crowns of England and Scotland, altering the course of British history forever. In France, the Bourbon queens operated within a different framework, one that denied them the throne, yet still demanded their presence at its center. Marie de Medici and of Austria and Marie Antoinette were queens consort, regents, and mothers to kings. Their power did not come from coronation or inheritance, but from their relationships, their political savvy, and their roles as mediators in times of crisis. Marie de Medici's regency, following the assassination of her husband Henry IV, demonstrated both the fragility and the possibility of female authority in a court dominated by male courtiers and foreign ambitions. Her efforts to maintain stability, broker marriages, and protect the crown for her son Louis XIII were met with resistance, exile, and political strife, but they left an undeniable imprint on the early 17th century. Anne of Austria, by contrast, emerged as a more enduring political figure. As regent for her young son Louis XIV, she guided France through the turbulence of the Fronde and oversaw the early years of what would become the longest and most absolute reign in French history. Her alliance with Cardinal Mazarin not only preserved her son's throne, but also helped to centralize royal authority in a way that would define the Bourbon monarchy. Her regency serves as a powerful example of how female leadership, when paired with strategic alliances, could preserve and even expand dynastic power. Marie Antoinette's life illustrates the perils of royalty in an age of rising public scrutiny and revolutionary sentiment. Though often vilified in popular memory, she was a complex figure caught in an era of profound upheaval. Her perceived extravagance and political influence made her a target, but her courage in facing trial and execution offered a final testament to her strength of character. Her downfall signaled not only the collapse of the Bourbon monarchy, but also the symbolic death of an entire mode of queenship, one defined by ceremony, inheritance, and the mystique of divine right. Taken together, the stories of these Tudor and Bourbon queens reveal multiple dimensions of female power. In England, power came with the crown and was expressed through direct rule. In France, it emerged more often through influence, regency, and maternal roles. But in both contexts, the queens were far more than passive ornaments of their courts. They were strategists, diplomats, reformers, patrons of the arts, and icons of their nations. They faced enormous challenges, from internal opposition to international threats, from infertility to factionalism, from personal scandal to public rebellion. And yet, time and again, they responded with creativity, resilience, and determination. Their impact on the perception of female power cannot be overstated. In their time, they disrupted the dominant narratives of male authority, forced their subjects to reckon with the idea of a woman as a political actor, and carved out new models of leadership. For later generations, these queens became both cautionary tales and inspirations. Elizabeth I became a symbol of national pride and political wisdom. Anne of Austria was remembered for her maternal devotion and political success. Marie Antoinette, though vilified in her own time, later became a tragic heroine in literature and film, embodying the contradictions of privilege, responsibility, and gender. Their legacies also influenced political structures beyond their lifetimes. Elizabeth's reign helped stabilize the English monarchy and laid the groundwork for Britain's emergence as a global power. The policies she implemented, the religious compromises she enforced, and the image she cultivated all contributed to a new understanding of what it meant to rule. Anne of Austria's regency helped to prepare France for the absolutist monarchy of Louis XIV, whose reign would dominate the continent for decades. Even Marie Antoinette, through her downfall, contributed to the reshaping of political discourse. The revolution that swept her and her family away was driven by new ideas of equality, representation, and the limits of monarchy, ideas that would echo throughout Europe in the following century. Beyond politics, these queens also left cultural legacies. Elizabeth was a patron of Shakespeare, of exploration, and of the arts, helping to usher in what would later be known as the English Renaissance. Marie de Medici commissioned monumental art and architecture, including the Luxembourg Palace and paintings by Rubens. And of Austria helped maintain court culture during a time of crisis, and Marie Antoinette, despite the controversy, helped define the aesthetics of an entire era, from fashion to architecture to music. Their courts became centers of innovation, creativity, and refinement, shaping the cultural identity of their nations in ways that extended far beyond their own lifetimes. Perhaps most importantly, these queens laid the groundwork for modern discussions of gender and leadership. In an age when women were expected to be silent, obedient, and confined to the domestic sphere, they spoke, acted, ruled, and resisted. They operated within systems designed to exclude them, yet they found ways to assert agency. Their stories complicate the narrative of female passivity and challenge the idea that power is inherently masculine. By ruling with intellect, grace, or sheer determination, they forced their societies to reconsider what women could do and be. Today, their legacies invite reflection on the evolving nature of power and the place of women in public life. In a world where female heads of state are still a minority, where gender bias continues to shape political opportunity, the lives of Tudor and Bourbon queens remain deeply relevant. They remind us that the struggle for recognition, autonomy, and influence is not new, and that the history of leadership is richer and more diverse than traditional narratives often suggest. They also provide cautionary lessons. Mary I's religious extremism, Marie de Medici's political inaccuracies, and Marie Antoinette's detachment from the suffering of the people all reveal the dangers of isolation, rigidity, and misjudgment. Yet, even in their failures, these queens offer insights into the complexities of rule and the pressures of visibility. To be a queen was to live a life of constant scrutiny, to walk a narrow line between expectation and reality, and to embody the contradictions of power. In the end, the queens of the Tudor and Bourbon dynasties were not just figures of the past, they were architects of their nation's futures. Through their leadership, their struggles, and their legacies, they helped to shape the political, cultural, and ideological contours of early modern Europe. Their stories deserve to be told not as footnotes to the lives of kings, but as vital chapters in the ongoing narrative of power, identity, and resilience. Their lives remind us that greatness often comes at great cost. That influence, when exercised by those historically excluded from it, can transform societies. That leadership is not confined to a single gender, but shaped by vision, conviction, and the will to endure. These women, each in their own way, defied the limits placed upon them. And in doing so, they changed the world.